Hey, and welcome to the highlights of episode number 65 with Josh Tickell. Some of my favorite parts of this episode were when he talks about the importance of our soil and how if our soil is depleted, then so is our food. This is something that we all need to think about and be more mindful of. I also love when he talks about how we can be agents for change to preserve our beautiful Mama Earth and how the Earth actually talks to each other. This was so fascinating and mind-blowing. But there is so much more wisdom, inspiration, and knowledge that you get in the full episode. So, to listen to the full podcast and to get all the info in the show notes, head to melissaambrosini.com/65 right now. Josh, so great to have you on the show. Can you tell us how our current agricultural model is affecting our health?
Well, essentially, whether you live in the United States or Australia, no matter really where you are in the world, if you eat a conventional Western diet, what we call in America the standard American diet, SAD, you're eating the majority of your food from four crops, really soy, corn, hay, and wheat. And most of those crops turn into processed foods, which go into our bodies. And there's this weird dynamic where we're consuming those foods, and in the consumption of those foods, we're really promoting the way those foods are grown. Meaning, as you vote with your meals, you tend to buy that which is then produced by the manufacturers of those foods. So in a way, it's a catch-22 because people say, well, what else can I eat? And of course, we'll go into that. But in a way, it reminds us of how much power we have as eaters to change the system that makes our food.
So how did you get into all of this? Like, where did it all start for you and your interest in climate change, and how did it all begin for you?
It actually began for me in college. I was an economics major, and the idea of infinite growth based on this mystical infinite resource base just didn't sit right with me. The more I looked at it, the more that the economies of the world were based on a finite grouping of resources, mainly resources from the Earth's crust. And the whole model that we based sort of Western civilization on, for me, just didn't add up. I mean, what happens when you have 10 billion people? Then you have phenomenally less resources to go to each person. So I really started asking, is there a different model? Is there another way to produce the basic necessities for humanity and to thrive, not just to survive? That sent me on a mission, a personal mission, where I ended up doing organic agriculture as a volunteer on farms across Europe. And that led me to find biodiesel, which led me to a veggie van that I drove across the country to books. But the investigation has always remained, and that is, if the current model of capitalism is in fact based on a lie, which I believe it is, then what's the alternative?
Eating these vegetables and fruit with these poisonous chemicals every single day, what is that going to do to us?
Well, the short-term implications are relatively mild, and that's where we get tripped up. We eat the product and we don't feel bad immediately. That's because humans are very much immediate kind of animals. We eat with our eyes first, and then with our mouths, and then with our bodies third. It's not long-term that we're able to gauge the effects of these things on an individual basis. But when we do longitudinal studies and we go, what is the effect of glyphosate long-term? What is the effect of 2,4-D long-term? What is the effect of alar, dimenazide, paraquat, one of 100 different chemicals used? We see the same thing over and over and over again. These are bioaccumulating toxins. So bioaccumulation means it has to accumulate before you see the result. Are you going to get sick from eating one apple that was sprayed? Unlikely. Are you going to get sick when you become 50 or 60 years old after consistent long-term exposure? Well, look at the medical industry. Look at what's happening with a lack of ability to prevent inflammation-related disorders internationally. It's a chronic and massive epidemic that we're now seeing. Everything from heart conditions, diabetes, all the major killers are all linked to an excess of toxin in the body. So, look, where's the number? Yes, there are many environmental toxins, but in terms of the load, in terms of the quantity that Westerners ingest, the largest quantity is going to come from agriculture, and it's going to come from your food. So, we're playing a very big chemical experiment for a very, very, very minor benefit. And it's showing. It's showing in the population as they age.
What is the connection between our food and the climate? A lot of people point the finger at cows, but is that really the only issue?
Cows are not the only issue, nor are they the primary issue with agriculture. You've got to think globally. You've got to think macro when you talk about agriculture. Globally, agriculture takes up 5 billion hectares. And when we look at rangeland, where we have livestock, including cows, that's about 3/5 or 3 billion hectares. The other 2 billion hectares is actual cropland. So the implication that cows are a leading cause of climate change, that's been at the forefront of a lot of misinformation. It's not that cows and feedlots don't produce a disproportionately high amount of greenhouse gases. They do, but they are not the primary cause. Internationally, we are talking about all agriculture globally producing 20 to 25% of greenhouse gases. Livestock is a subsection of that. Cows being somewhere in the range of 10 to 15% of the total. So it's a big number for sure. It's not the main number. The main number is still fossil fuels. And these numbers are according to the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, and the UN, and the FAO. We have a system, at least in the US, and I've seen it in different Western countries, where governments subsidize huge monocrops. Those subsidies allow farmers to grow crops they would never otherwise grow because they couldn't make any money on them. They allow them to sell those cheap monocrops to feed those animals. The animals get bulked up. And really, it's the middlemen who make the money. It's the beef industry. It's the grocery industry. That's where the markups are. So we're subsidizing somebody else's profits. And meanwhile, that meat that seems so great that we buy in the supermarket that's cheap is really bad for us. Hence the rise of heart attacks around the world. To think that governments are going to solve agriculture is a fallacy, not in the near future. I think young people have to take this on as the issue of our generation. And I think food is the overlooked weapon for changing and for winning the battle on climate change on the planet. And when I tell people get very freaked out about food. I'm a this, I'm an omnivore, I'm a vegan, I'm a vegetarian. I'm not asking anyone to change their primary diet. In fact, I don't even call the information in the Kiss the Ground book a diet. I call it a lifestyle guide. And when you begin to interact with your food as a function of your values, as a function of what you want in terms of your health, the health of your family, it's very different than a diet. A diet is something you try, most people fail at, and they give up on. Many people are dieting right now, but those diets won't last. A lifestyle is something you adapt into. So when I talk about food choices, I talk about a transition in which you begin really learning. You begin looking at the back of the boxes of the things you're buying. You begin to tweet at brands and Facebook at brands and go, this says cage-free. This says it's free range. This says it's all natural. What does that mean? Show me some pictures. Put them on Facebook. Make a video of your process. We want transparency. In fact, we demand it.
I just wish every single person listening to this to start asking questions and get out of the supermarket into the farmer's market, or start growing some of your own produce and ask questions at the butcher. I know for me, when I first started really inquiring about my food and the quality of it, I would be at the butcher for about an hour and a half just talking. Like, I would ask every question. I'm like, what are they fed? How big is the land? Like, I would ask all the questions. And a couple of great butchers around this area, very, very conscious, amazing butchers, they would have images. They'd have a booklet on the counter where you could see how many chickens are on each bit of land and how they rotate. And it's just really amazing. So don't be afraid to ask questions. You have a right to know. You have a right to know what you are buying, where it came from, how it was treated, what it was fed, what was sprayed on it. It's your body and your money. And at the end of the day, you're the one that's handing over that cash, and you deserve to know what you are contributing to and what is going to be going into your body.
This is a generation that is obviously obsessed with food. I don't think Instagram would have succeeded without food photographs. So, how can we turn that passion into something interesting? How can we turn the whole chef's table phenomenon into something that actually makes a difference? Look at all the food channels. Look at all the food shows. They almost never talk about where the food comes from. That's the first question I have. Where did this thing come from? I want to see the farmer. I want to see the rancher. I want to meet them. I want to hear their story. I want to see their soil. Is that soil rich and black? Because if it's rich and black, it's pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And if we did that on 5 billion hectares of land, and we did that on the 2/3 of the planet that has been desertified, literally turned into desert in the past couple hundred years, we would balance the climate. We would literally balance the climate of the planet. That may sound crazy, but think about it. 50 years ago, there was no such thing as corn syrup. There was no such thing as cows that ate corn. Agriculture that we know today is an invention that is less than 5 decades old. Why don't we invent something new that's healthy? Understanding the paradigm of soil is really important for folks. It turns out that in a handful of healthy soil, there are more microorganisms in that handful of soil than human beings that have ever lived. And when you realize that depth of life, it goes on and on and on from there. Some of the largest organisms on Earth are actually soil-based fungi. They spread for literally hundreds, sometimes thousands of acres, one living organism. And the intelligence of these organisms, they literally can transmit information from a tree that needs a certain mineral all the way across the landscape to another plant that has that mineral. And that mineral transfers through microorganisms across the microfungal network to the tree. So you're dealing with an extremely intelligent network of living life forms. That's quite incredible when you realize those same life forms have the ability to pull water out of the atmosphere and store water in soils. Wet, healthy soils grow more food. They grow more trees. They grow more dense vegetation. That vegetation is actually responsible for up to 40% of the water in a given ecosystem. I like to take our kids to farms. I like to take them to anything that has to do with producing food, anything that has to do with nature, with animals. It's just a constant conversation. And to see, my oldest begin to make the connections, that to me is an indication that, yeah, maybe it doesn't all happen in a day, but that self-awareness is going to serve them throughout their entire lives, is going to make them healthier. It's going to make them better stewards of the land. And ultimately, these are the kids that we're handing the planet and the climate changes to. They better understand how to deal with climate change. They better understand how to grow food. They're going to need those tools in a very short period of time.